Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace.
In the new covenant, we have boldness to enter into the Holy of Holies by a new and living way.
For so long, I was just always reaching out towards God. Where are you, Lord? But when I heard Andrew's message, it was just like the light bulb went off, and I just knew God is here with us.
And now, here's Andrew.
Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today is the end of my first week of teaching about Elijah. And I've got a book entitled Lessons from Elijah, and I tell you, this has just been powerful. This is a teaching that has really impacted my life. So much of what God is doing in my life came through the things that He showed me through the life of Elijah. And I tell you, this has been a really powerful week of programs. If you've missed any of it, I encourage you to go to AWMI.net and you can watch all of this week's TV programs that you might have missed. And you really need to go back and see this. This is some powerful stuff. I was talking yesterday from 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 4, where the Lord told Elijah to go to the brook Cherith and drink of the water of the brook. And he says, I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. And one of the points that I've been making that is just so powerful, God has used this in my life, is that He doesn't send your provision to where you are, but He sends your provision to where He told you to go. And the reason some people aren't seeing God's supply and provision in their life is because they aren't all there. They are waiting until God gives me the provision and then I'll go. Nope. You go. You step out in faith and then you find God's provision. So man, that is a powerful truth. I've been talking about that the last couple of days. And look at this in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 5. It says, So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. If Elijah hadn't have gone and done what God told him to do, then he wouldn't have seen this provision. That wouldn't have kept the provision from coming, but it would have kept him from receiving it. And here, this is a major point. You know, I teach on the grace of God a lot. I've been teaching on the grace of God for 50 years. And you know, in the beginning of when I was doing this, there was very few people teaching about the grace of God. And I got a lot of criticism. Nowadays, grace has actually become popular. And I find myself having to balance things out because people have taken the grace of God and have gone to such an extreme that they say, it doesn't matter whether you obey. It doesn't matter how you live. It's just the grace of God and you have nothing to do with it. This is a great example right here because God says, I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So He had already spoken to the ravens. The ravens were already en route. The supply was on its way. God, by grace, supplied Elijah's need. But did you know if Elijah hadn't have gone and done what He told him to do, that wouldn't have kept God from supplying the need. God's grace would have been there, but he wouldn't have ever seen it because you have to obey God doesn't respond to your obedience and when you do this, then God will do this. No, God has anticipated what our needs are. Before we ever had the need, God has created the supply. God has already commanded blessing upon us and everything, but He doesn't send that supply to where you are. He sends it to where He told you to go. And if you don't obey Him and go and step out, you won't see that provision. I use all of the things that the Lord is doing here in Woodland Park, Colorado, as an example of this, that the Lord told me to start a Bible school. He told me to build a first-class campus, and we've now got over $100 million worth of buildings and property debt-free on this property. And that's miraculous. I would say that we have seen a supernatural supply. In just the last 7 years, just a little over 7 years, we have acquired $100 million worth of property and buildings debt-free. I have one building, our parking garage, that we have a debt on, and I'm getting that knocked out just as quickly as I possibly can. But I think that you could say that God has given me a supernatural supply. But did you know what? He didn't send it to where I was. He told me to step out. I had to take a step of faith and buy this property when it didn't look like I had the money to do it. I had to commit to building these buildings. I had to start the process. And He didn't just give me a lump sum of $100 million. It just came in little $10, $20, $30, $40 gifts from people. He raised up partners. He began to send people to me. And God has supernaturally supplied. But you know what? I had to obey what God told me to do. When the Lord first spoke to me about all of this, if I would have said, no, that's too big for me, I can't do this, and I'm not even going to try. Did you know what? I don't believe that it would have kept God from supplying, but He would have raised up somebody else to get it done. It's not that my obedience caused God to do something. No, God already had it in His heart. You know, I wish that you could go to our website and look under the history of Andrew Wommack Ministries, and we have a video there that we've called the Little Star video. And if you watch that, there was a man, Gilbert Jackson, who he and his brother owned most of the property in Woodland Park, Colorado back a long time ago. And the man, Gilbert Jackson, he was a good man, but he didn't serve God. And he thought that people that needed God were people that needed a crutch. And so he wasn't a bad person, but he just had never served God. And he got colon cancer, and he came down with that. He wound up dying of colon cancer, and his hospice worker led him to the Lord on, I think it was his 72nd birthday, and he only lived 2 weeks after that. And when he finally got born again, he felt so badly about never serving the Lord and not doing anything for the Lord, and he had just a short time left, that he took this exact property that we're on right here, and he dedicated this property to the Lord specifically for Christian education. And he had a vision of buildings with glass all along the walls from floor to ceiling so that the people could look at the beauty of Pikes Peak while they were going to school. And so he dedicated this property to the Lord. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know anything about that. That was in 1972, and we bought this property in 2009, and we started construction in 2012. And I didn't know any of these things. We had already built that first building before his children came up and told us about this. And we have this video that shows this. And anyway, the reason I bring this up is to say that, see, this was in the heart of God. I didn't do something and then God rewarded me and blessed me and responded to my prayers that I wanted a Bible college and I wanted these buildings, and so I got God to do what I wanted Him to do. That's not how it was. This was already in the heart of God. It was something that God ordained. And He had already commanded the ravens. He had already commanded the blessing. If I hadn't have obeyed Him, He would have raised up somebody else. And you know, from my standpoint, I might have seen what somebody else done and thought, I wished I could have done that. Well, God gave me the opportunity. It's possible that He spoke to somebody else before me. I don't know. But anyway, my point is, just like Elijah, see, God had already commanded the ravens. He had already sent the supply. It was on the way. It had nothing to do with Elijah being obedient. God, by grace, was providing for Elijah because that's who he was. But Elijah's obedience didn't cause God's grace to come. If it's truly grace, then it has nothing to do with us. It's something that was in the heart of God, and He did it independent of us, separate from our goodness and our performance. But does that mean that we don't need to perform now because we got grace? No, God's grace is there, but you access God's grace through faith. That's what it says in Romans chapter 5, verse 2, that we have access into this grace wherein we stand. You have access by faith into this grace. And that word access, if it's the exact same Greek word that we get our word admission from. Just like you pay a price to get into a show, you have to buy a ticket. Did you know that faith is what grants us access, admission into the grace of God. God by grace has already provided everything, but you have to access it by faith. God by grace died for the sins of the entire world. When you ask the Lord to forgive you of your sins and come into your heart is not when He forgives you. He forgave you through Jesus 2,000 years ago. The grace has already been supplied, but grace alone doesn't save you. It says in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 that we are saved by grace through faith. Grace alone doesn't save you because Titus chapter 2, verse 11 says the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared unto all men. Every person has had God by grace pay for their sins. But does that mean that all men are saved? No, because you have access into this grace through faith. So you have to obey. Obedience doesn't make God do something for you. God has already planned good things for every one of you. He has plans for you that are completely independent of what you deserve or what you earn. It's just the grace of God. But your obedience determines whether or not you receive. It has nothing to do with God giving, but it has a lot to do with you receiving. You know, just imagine this, that I went and deposited $1 million in your bank account. And so I told you that you had $1 million. And it's not because you deserved it. It's not because you did something to earn it. I just by grace put $1 million in your bank account. But if I did that, it wouldn't benefit you anything unless you believed it and unless you acted on it, unless you went and wrote a check on it, unless you withdrew the money. I could have given and it would all be there, but it wouldn't benefit you. You could still live on the street. You could be poor. You could still live in a poor house. You could still have a car that's fallen down. You could not have the clothes that you need. You could not have the money that you need to be able to buy things. And the whole time I had given it to you, but unless you access it, unless you believe it enough that you act on it and write a check and withdraw, that money is not going to do you any good. So God by grace has a perfect plan for every single person that's watching this program. Every one of you. God loves you, and God's never made a piece of junk. God's never made a failure. God never intended for any of you to be living a life of defeat and failure and depression. That is not God's plan. God, by grace, has already provided something awesome, but it's not going to come to pass automatically. It's by grace through faith that you are saved. You access this grace through faith. You have to obey. You have to cooperate. And I get all of that from Elijah right here. God had already commanded the ravens to feed him there, so he went and did. If he hadn't have gone and done, then from his perspective, it would be like, God, I spoke for you, and yet here I am thirsty and hungry, and you aren't providing my needs. Nope, that's not true. God always provides our needs. Whatever He wants you to do, the provision is there, but you've got to go and do what God told you to do. You've got to obey Him. And did you know that the brook Cherith, it's on the east side of the Jordan River. It was a long ways from where Elijah was. He was over here in Samaria at this time. It was a long ways away. He had to go out of his way. And the whole time he could have been thinking, how do I know that God has already sent these ravens? How do I know that this is going to be there? When I get there, there's no towns around. If God hasn't done what He told me He did, if it isn't true, well, then I'm going to be out there and I could starve to death. It took a step of faith. But you know what? He went and did because he believed God's Word, and when he got there, the provision was there, not where he was. So again, in verse 5, it says, so he went and did according unto the word of the Lord, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith that is before Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. So in this verse 6, here's another lesson that I get from Elijah. I tell you, this is so rich. It's hard for me to not spend a year teaching through this thing. I'm really rushing through here. But the bread and the flesh, having the ravens bring that was supernatural. I don't know where they got this bread and flesh from, but apparently it was healthy. He survived with it. I don't know how it happened, but it was supernatural, and it was amazing that these ravens would bring that to the same place every morning and every evening. And it doesn't tell us how much period of time, but they did this until the brook dried up. So it was probably for months. This was absolutely a supernatural, miraculous supply of food. But then it says at the same time, he drank of the brook. And the brook wasn't supernatural. The brook was natural. It was just stuff that God had created, and to show it was natural, it eventually dried up. You know, if it would have been supernatural, it would have just supernaturally flowed even when the drought got into its worst part and all of the rivers dried up. Well, then this brook would have kept flowing. But no, it wasn't supernatural, it was natural. So here's another thing I learned from this is that God can supply your need and give you provision in supernatural and in natural ways. And actually, most of the time, it's a combination of the two. It takes faith to recognize that this is really God. You know, he could have sat there and have said, well, man, this is supernatural, the ravens, and I'm not going to do anything in the natural. But he needed this natural supply too. Did you know that you can go 40 days without food before your body actually begins to cannibalize itself and die? That's the reason that when Jesus went 40 days without food and afterward was hungry, this wasn't just appetite, this was real hunger. He was facing starvation. So you can go 40 days without food, but you know you can't go but about a week or maybe 10 days without water without you dying. So the natural supply of this water was just as essential as the supernatural supply. God will move in natural and supernatural ways. In my life, you know, I talk about the things that God has done, and sometimes I've had people who are skeptics and critical of me, and they will come at it and they will say, how do you know that that was supernatural? Like when my son was raised from the dead. He was dead for between 4 and 5 hours. He got stripped naked, put on a slab in a freezer in a morgue with a toe tag on. And I've had people say, how do you know that he was dead? Well, you don't put live people in a morgue. And yet there's just skeptics that will always think that, no, maybe it was misdiagnosed and stuff. There's people that are going to criticize you, and they're just always trying to relegate everything to some natural way of things happening. They do not want to believe that we can just draw on the supernatural supply of God. But then there's other people that they are so supernatural that they don't recognize that God also moves in the natural. I've had students that were here and they were believing God to meet their needs financially, and they would spend all day long praying in their closet, but they wouldn't dare go get a job. No, they wanted it to be supernatural. They just wanted God to drop the money out of the sky, and they wouldn't go get a job. That's not right. God will supply your need through some natural things, and there can be supernatural supply, but God's not going to counterfeit United States currency or whatever the currency is in the country where you live. He's not going to do that. He's going to supply money, physical things, through natural means. Now, it can be supernaturally natural. I mean, it is supernatural the way that I've had God raise people up. You know, when I was talking earlier in the week about how I called my 28 employees together and told them I was thinking too small, we now have 650 employees. I think that that's supernatural. In the last 17 years, we've gone from 28 employees to 650 employees worldwide. That's supernatural, but it's supernaturally natural. It's not that God just created these people out of nothing. No, they were people that, you know, He brought them to me. It's like the animals that went into the ark. It didn't say that Noah went out and got the animals and brought them in. It says that they came unto him into the ark. God supernaturally drew these animals. It was supernatural. In the natural, these animals wouldn't just naturally all come together and walk into the ark with Noah. No, it was supernatural. It was God that did it, but it was natural at the same time. So this is one of the things that I learned right here is that he ate of the bread and the flesh that the ravens brought him every morning, and he drank of the brook. It was both. And actually, he could have lived longer without the supernatural than he could have without the natural. 7 days, to 10 days without water and you're basically dead. And so it says in verse 7, and it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Here's another thing that I learned. Did you know why there was no rain in the land? Because Elijah had prophesied it. It was because of his own ministry. It was because of the things that he said. He basically prophesied this drought and it affected him. And this is something else that I've learned is that, you know what, when you stand and start speaking the Word of God, it doesn't mean that you're just going to automatically have everything supernaturally smooth. There's going to be no problem. Sometimes the very things that you're saying and doing are going to cause you problems. People will come against you and criticize you. Elijah experienced this brook drying up because of his own ministry, his own words. That's amazing. And here's another thing. It says in verse 8, and the word of the Lord came unto him. And so the Lord changed his place called there. In the next verse it says, arise and get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So here's another thing that I've learned through Elijah. And that is that even though Elijah sought God, God spoke to him, gave him the second word, provided for him supernaturally in all of this, that place called there wasn't a static place. It's not something you just do one time, you seek God, you obey, and then it's fine from there on. No, the brook dried up, and his place called there changed. But here's another thing I've learned about Elijah. He didn't just immediately leave. See, most people, if something was to dry up, if your supply all of a sudden quit coming, most people just depend upon themselves. They'll do whatever. They'll go out here and make whatever adjustments they do trying to survive. Elijah stayed there until he got another word from God. I've seen people that go to a church and they say, God told me to go to this church, and then something happens they don't like, and boy, they just leave because they don't like what's going on. Well, if God told you to go there, you should stay there until God tells you to go somewhere else. Now, He may take some of the negative things that happen, and that might be a part of it. But I'm saying that there's people that will follow the Lord and go someplace, but then if it dries up, if things aren't working, they'll just do whatever. They'll lean unto their own understanding. Elijah is a man who, even when he ran out of water that could have killed him, he didn't go someplace else until the word of the Lord came to him. Boy, that's good. And you know, if the Lord has spoken something to you, then you just keep doing what He told you to do until another word comes to you. There's a lot of people that they can prosper during these dramatic encounters where God spoke something supernatural to you and you get all inspired. But it's between those supernatural things. It's the in-between times when there isn't anything supernatural happening that most people just wander. They get bored. They're looking for something more. You just need to keep doing the last thing that God told you to do until you get a new word and recognize that the place called there is not a static location, whether it's a physical location or a place of the heart. It's something that you just follow the voice of the Lord. And if He leads you to do something for a while, but then He may send you to a new place. You may get a new place called there. I tell you, these things have really impacted my life. I know that this is touching a lot of you, and I encourage you to please get this teaching. If not for yourself, you could get this and share it with someone else. I think it would really be a blessing. So listen to our announcer. He's going to share with you about the book, about the Spanish book, about the study guides, CDs, and DVDs, and tell you how you can receive all of these materials. So listen to our announcer, and please call or write today.
Andrew's complete series titled Lessons from Elijah is available in either a CD or DVD album, a book in either English or Spanish, or in a study guide. Each of these valuable resources is available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. You can get these products as part of the Lessons package, which includes 2 books, Lessons from Elijah and Lessons from David, and 3 albums in your choice of either CD or DVD. Lessons from Elijah, Lessons from David, and Lessons from Joseph. These teachings will give you the chance to learn from the successes and mistakes of 3 very powerful but very human men of God. The lessons package has a catalog value of $135, but you can receive all of these valuable resources today for just $95. Go to AWMI.net to see all the ways you can get these products. Today, Andrew's book, Lessons from Elijah, is available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. We encourage everyone to give because there's a blessing in giving. But if you're simply unable to afford it, Andrew and his partners will provide this book to you free of charge. We want to say a special thank you to the grace partners of Andrew Wommack Ministries. Your gifts make it possible to put free ministry materials into the hands of many people in need. If you're not already a grace partner, we ask you to pray about becoming one today. You can become a grace partner or order resources through our website at awmi.net, or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time at 719-635-1111. To write us, use the address on your screen.
Many of you are aware that we have a Charis Bible College worldwide, but our headquarters is located in Woodland Park, Colorado, and God has really blessed us. We have seen God provide supernaturally, and we now have somewhere around close to $95 million worth of facilities at our main campus. But we owe about $23 million on a parking garage. And in order to get this paid off so that we can continue with student housing and all of the other things that are necessary for this Bible college, I've started what I call a 1K club. I was praying about this and the Lord just spoke to me that He was going to be touching people's hearts that can give a one-time gift of $1,000, or people that can pledge for $100 a month for 10 months. And in the next 10 months, I'm believing to get this parking garage totally paid off. I'd like to ask you to pray about it, and if the Lord speaks with you, join with us, become a part of this 1K club.
Charis, an accredited Bible college in the beautiful town of Woodland Park, has been changing people's lives for over 25 years.
The people here are so like-minded. They want to help you grow.
These are people who genuinely care about you. They want the best for you.
Be prepared to be blown away with the teachings.
It's not just a season in your life.
There's no way you can't change.
You can't really go wrong going to a place that you get to sit and listen to the Word for 4 hours a day.
Being under the Word that much just allowed God to pour so much into me.
If you feel a supernatural peace about coming to Charis, that's God.
I know you're like, how, when, where, all these questions, just do it. The Lord will provide.
I was doubting and second guessing it, but when I took that step of faith, immediately things were provided.
Just being around like-minded believers, teachers who are there for you and ready to talk to you at any moment and answer your questions, there's just nothing like it.
Just follow the leading of the one that you serve, and that's always going to be the right direction to go.
Go to charisbiblecollege.org to register today. Experience Charis Bible College during our Campus Days event in Woodland Park, Colorado. Enjoy the teachings, meet the instructors, and find God's purpose for your life. Learn more at charisbiblecollege.org.